Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and in a moment, Binman will be presenting his long-form stats file show covering last week's match against the Tigers, as well as previewing our upcoming top four clash against the ladder leaders, the Sydney Swans, at the SCG. Today, May 1st, 2026, marks 100 years to the day since the opening round of the 1926 VFL season, the year that delivered the Melbourne Football Club's second premiership. Our very special podcast chronicling the 1926 season has just dropped, so be sure to check that out after the stats files. Whispering Jack sits down with journalist and author Ian Munro, who takes us on a journey through the 1926 season and the road that led the Demons to the club's second premiership. He brings this remarkable period to life, guiding us through the people, the moments, and the story behind that unforgettable day in October that remains forever etched in our club's history. In addition, in order to mark the centenary of our second flag, there are two special feature articles on demonland.com commemorating the 1926 season. One is written by Whispering Jack, and the other is written by Ian Munro. So head on over to demonland.com to check out those two articles. The Demonland podcast will return live on Monday night at 8 p.m. to dissect our upcoming match against the Swans in Sydney. If you want to listen to the show live, then head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8 p.m. But now, here's Binman with the stats files.
A big hello to all the Demon fans out there and lovers of all things statistical and analytical when it comes to the mighty Demon Football Club. I'm Binman. This is the Demonland Stats File preview podcast Friday. Looking forward to the game on Sunday against the Swans and doing a quick review of the terrific win over the Tigers. Probably about a 30-70 split this week in terms of review and preview. We'll see how I go. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on that I'm recording this podcast on, the Boonwurrung people, and pay respects to any elders listening as the rubbish gets picked up outside my recording studio. Yeah, terrific. Let's get into it. It was a really interesting game against Richmond. So just a quick overview. I'll do a review of that game, equity points. I'll go through the three phases of football: defense, contents, and offense. A bit of a wrap up at the end of that of why I think we won the game. And then, of course, a preview, a stats focused preview of our big game against the Swans on Sunday. Terrific game on ANZAC Eve. They do it really well. I thought Richmond put on a really good show that night in terms of the whole organisation of the event. I sat up the top of the Ponsford stand, which was completely open for general admission, and it was awesome. It was really beautiful night. The ground looked great, but I really enjoyed that perspective of looking down the ground from height, and you could really, get a sense of the systems and structure, and also the patterns of moving. And what was really evident watching from that height is what King has talked about how he wants us to play, where it's not so much all-team defense. It's all-team defense and all-team offense, and he's used various ways of describing it: squeezing up, the defender squeezing up, the forward squeezing up, and I'm starting to think of it's like a swarm. It's like a swarm with the ball at the centre of that swarm, and so you can really get a sense of that swarming and also the structure when you sit up high and look down from behind the goals. And I've said this before over the years on the various podcasts. I'd love to be able to have some down-the-ground footage. I don't know why KO don't just put that on. I'd be certainly someone who'd watch a full game from behind the goals, that footage that you see sometimes on the footy shows. So it was an interesting game from a lot of levels. I think there's some important caveats to inform any analysis of the game. It can't be overlooked that both teams were on a 5-day break, coming off a 5-day break. It has a massive impact. Of course, you can mitigate it by how you prepare for it, which as I talked about last week on the podcast show, on the Stats File preview podcast. I suspect we did prepare for this, that we looked at the Brisbane and Tigers game as a double, and that the pressure was pretty good in this game. Unlike the two teams last night, Collingwood and Hawthorn, who are both coming off a 5-day break, their pressure was just, well, particularly Hawthorn. I can't remember if Collingwood were 5-day break. Certainly the Hawks are 5-day break, and their pressure was substandard. It was a big factor. It was clearly they were the fatigue. So both teams coming off a 5-day break. I actually thought the game standard and the pressure and the intensity, for us for the whole game and Richmond for the first 3 quarters, was actually really impressive given the 5-day break. And again, I presume, a factor in that is both teams preparing for this big game. It was our only Friday night game of the year. Maybe we'll get one later in the year, but it's the only one that we've got scheduled thus far. Obviously, ANZAC Eve, so that's a big night for both clubs, and so you want to be playing some decent footy. But nonetheless, 5-day break is far from optimal. They barely not train at all during the week in terms of when they've only got a 5-day break. I'll just have a sip of my coffee. The other thing is 12 of the best, as I noted last week, really, that the key thing is 12 of the Tigers' best 23 were not playing in this game. And, you take out your 3 or 4 of your best players from our team. You take Cozzy out of that team, for instance, it looks completely different. I think that's a massive factor and shouldn't be overlooked. I was really impressed, actually, with how the Tigers played for most of the game. I thought they were pretty well coached. They're on a bit of a hiding to nothing. It's just, it is just overlooked every week, even in the discussion of it. And I saw, I can't remember his name now, the young gun, the young Dusty lookalike is out now with an Achilles till August or September. So they just can't take a break. They just simply didn't have the legs to run it out. And I noted on the Demonland podcast that, you take out 12 of your best players. It's not just that you're taking out 12 players who would otherwise, be amongst your best. You're taking out 12 players who are likely to have had multiple AFL pre-seasons and can run out games. So, that's definitely a caveat at looking at the performance, both how good they were, I thought, and, if you want to benchmark us against them. And, of course, a big one that really, in terms of the important caveat in terms of informing the analysis, it relates to having so many of their best players out, as I said, around the fitness and the running, is that all of the data pretty much was completely skewed and blown out by the blowout in the last quarter. So Wheelo on Demonland, on the thread on Stats File 2026 thread, terrific thread. Haven't read it, check it out. He started putting a quarter-by-quarter breakdown for a number of key stats, and it was particularly useful for this game, particularly contested possessions and ball-winning equity points, because both were completely skewed and in the last quarter where we dominated, but they were pretty much level for the entire game up until that last quarter. I'll run through some of them at the back end of this review when I talk about the key reasons why we won the game and why the Tigers lost the game. But yeah, Uze made that same point in his post-match presser. He said that their focus coming into the game was winning the contest, winning stoppages, and as he noted, and as we'll touch on, they largely did for the first 3 quarters. So they're quite impressive in that sense. Really hard. I wish I could see this live and then the television coverage to know whether they played a player behind the ball. I have a feeling they played a player in defence, or alternatively at other times brought players up to the contest to win more contests, which might explain why we dominated the hit-outs yet didn't really dominate clearances or scores from stoppages. So yeah, Uze made that point, and they just don't have the legs at the moment to play out games or quarters. I meant to write it down, but I heard during the game, I watched the replay on Wednesday a couple of nights ago, and also red time. I forget how many goals. I think we scored 4 or 5 more goals than them in the first 3 quarters in the so-called red time, which is the last 10 minutes of each quarter. So they were struggling at the end of each quarter. In particular, I think it was the third quarter where the game was really in the balance. Still thought they were quite impressive after halftime, and it was in the balance, and it just seems like it was either the end of the second or end of the third, and we just got a hold of them, and that was that. So they're really struggling to run out games and quarters. It really reminds me of us last year. I don't think we're ever that far behind the 8 ball in terms of our fitness as the Tigers evidently are, and that's probably related to their horror run with injuries, but they just don't have the legs to run out quarters. So and that was looking back at my preview of this game, that's what I predicted. It panned out that way. It actually stuck with us longer than I thought that they would. I was pretty confident right from the get-go, partly because you can tell within the first 3 or 4 minutes of how you're going to go, and certainly in the first 15 minutes. I heard some crazy stat that the Swans, something like when they get to 180 pressure rating points in the first 15 minutes of the game, they've won the last 15 of the last 17 games, I think it was, and the 2 they lost, they won by 20 points or 30 points in both games on expected score. So, that's true of the Swans, but I suspect if you ran those numbers for every club, it would look similar, or maybe not quite as dramatic, but it certainly would with us. And we looked like we were, turned on and ready to play. And so, I was pretty confident right from, I said, the last week on the show that I thought we would win by 50 points or more. We did. Part of that, I noted that's predicated on us bringing AFL level intensity, and we did, unlike the Essendon game. So, and you can tell that really early in a game, just how it feels, the game. And, that it was a little bit in that first quarter. I thought we were really excellent. They really took their chances. They kicked their first 4 goals from set shots straight. We missed a couple of very gettable ones. But, to be fair to them, similar thing happened in the third quarter where they missed some chances. So, I was actually pretty impressed with the Tigers, and they won't get much love for this game because everyone will be focusing on the fact they haven't won a game, I guess. And but, yeah, I thought that I was impressed with their performance, and I think our performance, shouldn't be sort of underappreciated just because of Tigers 0-6. For the first 3 quarters, they were quite impressive, I thought. So running through, so we'll go through equity points, the 3 phases of football, and then a wrap up of why I think we won the game. Equity points, again, the caveat being these are really skewed by that last quarter smashing. But nonetheless, post-clearance equity points 150.8, AFL average is 125.2. Ball winning, really impressive. That relates to the contest as well. Of course, 131.8 for ball winning, AFL average 111. They were plus 21 on them. And increasingly just on differentials, I'm increasingly going to focus on differentials because I think differentials are more between the two teams are a more important measure than totals or averages for the game. It's really what's most important is how much better you did than your opponent in that particular match. And I'll get to one of the examples of that, which is scores from turnover. Where was I? Ball use 61.9. So 61.9 of our aggregated player rating points, when you aggregate them up across all players, were 61.9 points. For how we use the ball, AFL average is 48.5. Again, that was somewhat skewed by the last quarter. However, what I would say is that, our ball use has actually been a lot, it's actually a strength of ours this year. And, I guess that part of that is having 3 of our players who Viney's injured, and Track and Claz out of the side, although I did see with interest that Track remarkably is on some measures, the best kick in AFL at the moment, which on the back of a technique change that I was banging on about for the last 5 years that he should make. So bit of irony there. Ball use, we smashed them for 61.9 to 39. We're plus 22.6 equity points for how we use the footy. Remember that measures scoreboard impact. AFL average, as I said, is 48.5. So jumping quickly through the three phases of footy. This is a little, again, it's sort of with that caveat about the last score blowout, but one of the things that jumped out for me from the defence stats was we didn't lose a defensive one-on-one contest, so terrific. On the other hand, they lost 45.5% of their defensive one-on-one contests, so that really demonstrated, the effectiveness of our defensive unit, which I thought was really impressive. AFL average for that is 25.6%. We're averaging losing 30.8 this season. So the defensive coaches would have been thrilled, as would have Kingy, with that defensive one-on loss percentage. I think from memory, Lions didn't lose one last week, and so this week we didn't lose one. Awesome stuff. Just on that, I just watched the replay and made some sort of random notes, but through things that jumped out, one of them was Xavier Taylor's mark. I just loved the aggression for which he flew at the ball, intercept mark. We had 66 intercepts, 64. We had 12 intercept marks, one of which was the Xavier Taylor pack mark. And I just really loved also after he took the mark and he got up and he sort of put his elbow into his opponent, the guy manning the mark, to, really, one, to fly for that ball. It was a really key intercept. It was deep in out of fence, hits the ground. They've got a chance at scoring. Obviously, and two, just his aggression against his opponent. He's a lot to like about the young fella, that's for sure. Excuse me. Territory was really interesting. Territory for the match was 57.43. For the season average, we're 53.47. So not a million miles from that. But what was interesting was, and I'll get to this in the why we won, we were very focused on territory in this game. We have been all season, and I talked about that in the first Stats File podcast and on Demon Land podcast, that, there's a number of ironies, one of which is that we, as I predicted would be, and I predicted the media would start talking about it, and they are, is how focused we are on long kicking and territory. Our best quarters, I thought, in terms of how we played, I thought we played pretty well in the third quarter, but we had a chance to put them to the sword a bit in the first quarter and didn't quite take it. But we were 61% of the time in our forward half in the first quarter, 65% in the last quarter. Again, that's skewed. So, but I thought it was interesting that we opened the game really looking to dominate territory. They can engineer that to a degree by how hard they squeeze up the ground, how long they make the ground, as they often describe it, and how wide they use it. But we're clearly focused on winning territory coming into this game. In the contest, again, the caveat of that last quarter, but we're plus 21. I think I'll go through in a sec, but we're plus 23 in the last quarter. So up until three-quarter time, they were slightly ahead for contested possession, but the ultimate total was 150 to 129. So differential of 21. AFL average is 129.1. So, we were, 20 odd above the AFL average for contested possessions. And it goes to a point that I want to pick up in our preview about the focus of our game, and the irony really is that we're very focused on territory, the contest, and pressure. So in terms of the other contest numbers, smashed them for post clearance, 10 more than them for contested possessions post clearance, 7 more for ground ball gets post clearance as well. We took only 2 more contested marks than them. Again, these figures a lot of them were blown out in the last quarter. So the Tigers actually matched us for intensity and pressure and contest really well for the entire match. And it was really interesting to hear Uze say that was one of their key focuses coming into the game. Centre bounce attendance is really interesting. They, one of the things I'll talk about in the preview is what I think of, our game plan is different. I really think our game plan is different to what, one, I thought it was going to be, and two, what seems to be the general narrative about how we play, which is, like the Sydney Swans model and the Suns and fast, of course, and handball meters gained and that stuff. So, of course, that's an element of it, but I think there's a number of other important strings to the bow for our game plan. But one of the interesting things is I talked about, like, we had 11 players run through the centre against Freo, centre bounce attendances, other than our rucks. And I was wondering whether that was a model that King was going to use, essentially, because I think it was, I can't remember, but it was 11 against Freo, and it was up around 6 or 7 in the other games, and then it dropped down to 4 or 5, I think 5 against the Bombers, and it's remained there. And I was working on the assumption that he maybe was using like a squad mentality for centre bounce attendances. So I said 11 against Freo, that's a lot of players having centre bounce attendances. But since that game, he's basically gone to 4 or 5, and again it was just 4 in this match. So outside Max Gawn and Max Heath, only Jack Steele, Cozzy Pickett, Caleb Windsor and Sparrow had centre bounce attendances. In fact, ironically, the top 6 centre bounce attendances, the top 4 were midfielders, because Maxi only had 18 centre bounce attendances for 55%. His season average is 77. He was 85.5 last year, so it just shows the big gap in this game. And Maxi Heath had 15 centre bounce attendance. He went to 45% of them. So, again, only 4 starting mids, essentially, for the entire game, which is different to what he was doing in pre-season, Kingy, and different in those first 4 or 5 games the first 5 games up to the Essendon game. Cozzy Pickett, 26 centre bounce attendances. Jack Steele had the most, 27. Caleb Windsor, 24. And Tommy Sparrow, another great game for Sparrow, he had 22. Ruck contests, notable, 44 to Maxi Gawn, 39 to Max Heath. What was interesting, that was it. No one else took a ruck contest. It's almost remarkable, hard to believe almost. Van Ruin didn't. So they were the only 2 ruck contests were taken by Maxi Gawn and Max Heath. Hit-outs was really interesting. Maxi Heath had 39 ruck contests, and Maxi Gawn had 44 ruck contests, yet Max Heath had 5 more hit-outs than Maxi. I reckon they'd be talking about that at training, wouldn't they? And or maybe Max Gawn could come back and say, well, between, Max got 47 in total hit-outs, but Maxi Heath had 26 hit-outs, 5 more than Maxi Gawn, who had 21. And the number that was talked about a bit in the coverage, I watched 2 replays, the Fox one on the same night, and then the Channel 7 one, which is on the AFL.com. If you watch that replay, it cuts out all the ads and all the palaver. You just get exactly the quarter ends, the next one starts. It's terrific, actually. But it was interesting watching the 2 replays, because you get 2 different sets of commentators. And on the 7 replay, they were talking about this. But Maxi Heath had 26 hit-outs, 13 of which were to advantage. Very impressive. And that is a very impressive rucking performance for sure. Of the 50, thanks for Willow for this number, of the 54 games this season that a player has had 25 hit-outs or more, Heathy's performance was the Moose, was the 3rd highest hit-out to first possession conversion, 69.2%, and the 4th highest hit-out to clearance conversion, 53.8%. Very impressive. It's worth noting, though, that didn't really translate into a clearance or scores from stoppage dominance. So clearly the Tigers were doing a bit right in terms of, doing something right in terms of defending losing clearances and first after they lost first possession. Still, nonetheless, an impressive performance from Maxi Heath, despite we didn't really dominate clearance or scores from stoppages. I really like him. He's very athletic. In many ways, he actually reminds me of Grundy in terms of his athleticism and his running. And, it's another great pickup with Steele and Myercheck. Really, really impressive. Seems like he's a good culture guy as well. Team pressure. I said Uze came into this game with a clear focus on winning team pressure. Pressure and contest and winning at stoppages. It was, last week, very low pressure rating, and part of that was, the style. And it was really interesting this week that a theme coming in for the Brisbane's game was to ramp up their pressure and intensity, and geez, they did. They were very, very impressive. I thought the Lions this week just shows, that their pressure was in the 155, I think, from memory last week, the Lions, and they really ramped it up. I think it was north of 180 in their game on the weekend. But they would have thought they came to play last week because they had the two milestone games. I can't remember the first one was Lachie Neale. So, the bit to play for there. Clearly, Fagan was pretty unhappy with their effort level, and they resolved that this week. In this game, we opened 163 to 162. Second quarter, we came out. We really put them to it in terms of pressure and intensity. 195, that'd be right up there in probably our top 10 quarters, probably top 5 quarter pressure ratings this season. We haven't had too many over 200. So 195 to 186. So they matched us. Again, watching the game on replay, I thought they played, a lot better than what the final score would indicate. And so there's a lot to like from a Tigers perspective, I think. Structurally, they were pretty sound as well. 168 to 175. So in the third quarter, effort by them was excellent coming out after halftime. But again, so this is the big one that, really speaks to me about their ability, to run out of legs. 186 to 172 pressure rating in the last, so we're plus 14 for pressure rating in the last. The match total at the end was 177 to 174. All right, so just in terms of pressure points, a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Sparrow, amazing, 29 pressure acts, 83 pressure points. He's averaging 53.6 pressure points this season, so 30 points above his average almost. Really, really impressive. The other player I wanted to highlight in terms of pressure, so Sparrow had the most pressure points for this game, 83. The next was 48. Just shows how powerful and he was in terms of what he brought to the game pressure-wise. Just want to highlight Cozzy Pickett. What a game. Just an awesome game. We talked about this at length on the podcast on Demonland, so I won't go into his game. I thought I might, but just an amazing performance. One of the things I want to highlight about his pressure is that he had 35 pressure points, so he was our fourth highest rated. He's averaging 43.9 this season. Just that combination of high skill, X factor, but still doing all of the hard work around pressure and contest, winning his own footy. It is just such a rare combination of attributes and skills, and I just could not be more impressed with him this season. So looking at offense, disposal, retention was pretty good. We 71, but theirs was pretty good too. Really, the only one I wanted to highlight here was kicking into forward 50 in terms of retention. We retained at 62% of the time. They retained at 46.3% of the time. AFL average for retention kicking into forward 50 is 47.4. So we're well above that. I suspect, though, again, that's another one blown out by the last quarter figures. Meters gained, it's really interesting, meters gained, and I want to talk about this a little bit more in the preview about meters gained. Meters gained, we were almost 987 more meters gained by foot, which really spoke to the fact we were playing a territory game, and really speaks to what I think is actually the sort of fundamental part of our game is territory. Is not fast ball movement, it's territory, I think. Almost 1,000 more metres gained than with our kicking. This one was really fascinating, 148 metres gained by hand, and they had -3 metres gained by hand, so we're plus 150, well below our average, which is, I think, up around, I think it's 300 or something. I'll speak to that a bit later. But it just showed I'm trying to remember the other game that was similar where it was negative. But one of the other wins we had, it was negative metres gained. May have been the Suns, actually. No, it wasn't the Suns. but yeah, 148 metres gained by hand, 147 more than them. That's a big differential. 150 more than them because of negative. That's a really, really big differential. But different to the way we're played. So, it's our season average so far is 250 metres gained by hand, 148. So well done. Down on that, and I think that's a function of how we played. We were really, really kicking to contest very evidently in this game. In terms of territory and attack, metres gained, that was really curious. In terms of territory and attack, time in forward half, I'll speak to this, I've already spoken to that a bit, but it was 56.7 to 43. We had 14 more inside 50s, again blown out that last quarter, 17 more shots at goal, 14 scores for inside 50.8% of the time we went inside 50, we scored. They were only at 36.2%. I think that was a big key. Our defence was really excellent, as evidenced by not losing a one-on-one defensive contest. Goals for inside 50, 31.1% of the time that we went inside 50, we scored a goal. They were only 23.4, which sounds low, but this AFL average is 24.3, so they were actually only a tick below AFL average. We were much more efficient, particularly in that last quarter, of course. Marks inside 50, they actually took 11, which is more than I would have guessed. We took 16. AFL average is 12.3 per game. Transition, everyone's talking about transition footy. I think it's a bit overblown, actually, in terms of its importance. It's turnover, scores from turnover, around 65% of team scores in the AFL at the moment from turnover, the rest stoppages and contests. But, obviously we're playing a trend, everyone's talking about that transition from half-back flank and we're playing it. But, of our chains, our transition chains, 28% of the time in this game we scored. AFL average at 21.9. Defensive half to forward, 50%. Forward 50% in chains is 38.7. They were well above them, 28.3. And defensive half to score percentage, we're running at 15.8 this season, 15.8% of the times we go from the back half with a chain, we score. This on average, this AFL average is 13.4. In this game, we were 19.7% of the time from defensive half to score to their 11.7% defensive half to score percentage. So expected score, I've mentioned this every week now, and I'm going to have to ask Willow to get me some deep dive data on this. Seems remarkably, there seems to be statistically something going on, and it might be to do with the way the game's being played with this fast ball movement off the halfback flank. I'm not sure. I'll dig into it. I'm curious about where this is coming from. But again, our score was above our expected score. And again, our opponent's score was above the expected score. That's been the case in every single game so far we've played. No idea how it is across the AFL, but in the 7 games we've played, every single time our expected score and our opponent's expected score our actual score has been above, and the opponent's actual score has been above the expected score. The expected score in this match was 114.3. We scored 126. Richmond's expected score was 63.5, and they scored 72. In terms of score sources, one of the really interesting ones, this one's a little bit sort of minutiae, the expected chain score. So expected points scored based on the origin of the team's chain. And why I haven't really spoken to this because it's a little bit hard to sort of conceptualize in some ways. Why I wanted to this week because on turnover, looking at where we won our turnovers and then chained up from that point on. They include clearance, turnovers, and kick-ins is the origin. So, that's how a chain can start. Our expected score from every time a chain began for turnover was 45. So 45 points expected score, chain score from turnover, but yet we scored 59 points. So we were plus 14 on the expected score from the chains that we got from turnover, that when we turned the ball over, when we got the ball off Richmond. Richmond, on the other hand, their expected change score when they won the ball off us was 40 on turnover, was 40.4, yet they only scored 24 points. Massive. So that tells me a couple of things, or a number of things, but a couple of things jumped out. One, we were very efficient once we did win a turnover. We were above expected score from winning those turnovers. So we were very efficient in terms of that, again, with the caveat of that last quarter. But they were really, really inefficient. So now part of that could be their kicking skills and their inability to hit that last target or inside 50 or whatever, or their chain breaks down at some point. But part of it also must be that our defensive work was strong in this game. So that was a big factor in the game. The differential was 4.6. So between the two teams on expected change score from turnover was plus 4.6, yet the actual was 35 points. So we scored 35 more points than turnover, but the expected score from turnover was 4.6. So that was a big factor in the game in terms of just on the numbers why we won. So the AFL, we've been giving up so far in this season 50.3 points on turnover. They scored 24, so under 50% of our season average against on turnover. The Tigers 24, so a bit of their sort of not having the best players and their errors and the mistakes they're making, but also a bit of our effectiveness of our defence. We scored 59 points, as I said. Our season average for scores from turnover is 53.9, so above that. Where did our scoring start? Just a couple of ones that I've picked out. Defensive midfield. So it was 33 of our points were scored from the defensive midfield. Season average is 23.3, so a lot more from the defensive midfield. I really felt like we squeezed that, that game between the arcs is how, it looked from up above. The one that was really curious, though, our season average for scoring chains beginning in our forward 50 is 15.4. The AFL average is 17. We scored 38 of our points and the chain began inside our forward 50. That's massive. It means we're turning the ball over inside our forward 50. The King would love that. Alternatively, Uze would have not been happy with that. Points from defensive half. Season average is 41.6. We are 47 above that. But this was a big one. They actually moved the ball pretty well in some respects, as I mentioned before, in terms of some of their transition work was pretty good, and they were moving the ball okay, but they didn't score from the defensive half. So we're giving up on average 40.9 from the defensive half this season. They could only manage 22 points from their back half. Great defensive effort by us, but they're not going to win many games of footy only scoring 22 points from the back half. We scored 47 points from our back half, as I said, against a season average of 41.6. Just by way of comparison, the Tigers 22 points from their back half. Last week, the Lions scored 49 of their points from the back half. So I think they scored, 102 points last week. So almost bang on 50% of their score. The Lions score was from the back half last season. Just shows the importance of moving it well from the back half and damage in a damaging fashion and putting the score on the scoreboard. We defended well against their ball movement, particularly when it got inside our D50. All right, so in terms of those numbers, just quickly, why we won or lost, I think I was pretty close to the mark in terms of my preview last week. I think I mentioned that, I could see us getting 60, 70 points on turnover because I thought we would just beat them for run, really. And I mentioned they had 12 of their best 22 out. I just didn't think they'd have the legs. That's how the game panned out. We didn't actually score as many points on turnover as I thought we might, 59. But the differential, as I said, to the key thing is 35 points. So that's a massive differential. I wasn't far off the mark on that front. It's perhaps that's oversimplifying things, but I just think that's at the end of the day, if I was to pick one thing, that would be it. We just, they just didn't have the ability to go with us, and we played that way to, I think to maximise that. Really, it was interesting the way the game did go. As I said, I thought they played really well for big patches of it and did a lot right. Must be really hard. Melbourne fans have been in this situation, haven't we? It must be really hard to be in this sort of holding pattern when you've got so many of your best players not playing, to be able to keep your systems and structures and your game plan and method. But I think they did a pretty good job. I was actually surprised the second time I watched the replay how well they played in parts. And I think it was coming out in the third quarter, they looked great and they kicked a couple of goals, and their system looked pretty good. But simplifying things, they just ran out of legs, I reckon. I just would quickly talk, as I mentioned, the quarter by quarter differential tells that tale, as did the pressure rating before. So that they were just focusing on that last quarter. So pretty level for all of the key stats. We're up on inside 50s a little bit, but, in reality, pretty level for the entire game for key stats, as Uze noted in his presser. But in the last quarter, there was blowouts. We're plus 38 disposals in that last quarter, plus 20 for contested possessions. I can't remember. I mentioned that it was 28, wasn't it, in that last we were up 28, but for the game, so 20 of them were in the last quarter. 21 more uncontested possessions than the Tigers in the last quarter. We took 5 more marks. We had 7 more inside 50, so I actually thought that might have been more than that in that last quarter, given our dominance. Our expected score was plus 28.8 in that last quarter. Equity pre-clearance was plus 10.7. Equity post-clearance was plus 21.6. It helps explain the contested possession numbers, or the contested possession numbers help explain that number. Overall equity possession, or equity for ball winning, was plus 17.9 in that last quarter. And how we used the ball was interesting across the 4 quarters. For impact, equity ball use in the first quarter was negative 0.1. That tracks with a lot of sort of missed opportunities that we had. Plus 5.4 in the second quarter, plus 2.6 in the third. But when their pressure dropped, it's just so much easier to use the ball effectively and with impact, because you're not kicking under pressure or receiving under pressure. And we were plus 14.7 equity points in that last quarter, I think, as I said, is a reflection of their intensity dropping off, which goes to the discussion about how we're going to beat the Swans, which is pressure. But I'll get to that right now. So jumping now into the preview of the game against the Swans. Really, really looking forward to this game. Cannot wait. I'm really excited to see about how we'll play. Just a couple of quick overview running through some of the sort of info about the game. It's going to be a beautiful day, 25 degrees, light wind, perfect for a game of footy. The betting, Swans are $1.18 to win. D's are $4.35 and the line is 31. I reckon that's a bit short, to be honest. We're 4th on the ladder. We're 5-2. They're dominant. I'll get to that in a sec. They're certainly playing dominant footy. I just think that on form, I'm a punter. My background is you look at form, and on form, I don't think that we're miles off them. It's probably not a million miles away from being right, but still I think that looks a bit skinny. The one that I thought, looks value is total match points, 187. I could see this game, we're aiming to get 100 points every game. That's King has said that. So even if we don't get to that and lose the game, and, we're a good chance of getting to 85, 90. And if they win the game, they're a good chance, of course, of getting into 100. So that looks a bit thin to me, 187. So that looks value. Coming in, who's coming in? So Pets is coming back into the team, Jai Cully is out. The bench at the moment, I'm pleased that they kept Xavier Taylor in. I did think that they might give him, you could send him back to the VFL. But, we won, and don't change a winning team, reward the players who are involved in that. I really like that. So, the bench at the moment is a squad because it's Sunday. The bench is Tolstrup, Laurie, Heath, Latrell, Petty, Cross, Henderson, and AMW. You'd assume Colt is a lock. Well, I think he's a lock. I suspect if they weren't going to, so he's in. I suspect if they weren't going to play Latrell, they'd just manage him and run with, he's a young year player. He needs a chop out. He's got some things to work on, yada, yada, yada. We'll send him back to Casey and, play at a less sort of intense level. I can't see why they'd put him on the bench. So I reckon he's in. He's a lock as well. Maybe not a lock. Colt's a lock. I reckon Latrell's in. I think Pets will come in. I mean, why bother selecting him at all if he's not 100% ready to go? So he's in, and I think he'll take Curnow. It's a perfect matchup. He'll match him for strength. Curnow, who I think is a totally overrated player, but that's another conversation. He isn't really particularly quick, so won't exploit Pets, who isn't particularly quick either. So I think that's a perfect matchup. He comes in. So that leaves two to come from Cross, Heath, Henderson, and AMW. My own feeling is I think we'll go with Cross to come in. Fritter will stay on the wing. Cross will take Jai's forward role. He provides up and down the ground run, defensive spread as well. He's super fit, as I've mentioned, after his debut. Really good in the air, loves to jump at the ball, bring the ball to ground, which I think has become a key element of the way we're playing. Kick long to a contest and bring the ball to ground and and win the next contest. A bit like how Collingwood were playing last night, actually, very similar. So I think he'll come in, and I think AMW comes in, at least I hope he does, and takes Papley. The unlucky one, obviously, then in that is Heath would come out, but I just think we need all runners on deck to match the Swans' running power. I just don't think we can carry that extra at all. That's my view. It'll be interesting, and the Swans only have the one ruck, so Grundy, I think Max will go head-to-head with Grundy in the game. I reckon that would be Max's preference. So I suspect that's how we'll go. Be interesting. So, we don't have to wait long for that. A couple of the other key numbers that in terms of how these two teams come up against each other. Yeah, it's a wipeout. Like the Swans are nuts. Like they're number one in just almost every single key statistical thing. It really is, it's almost absurd. It's they're second in handballs per game, third in disposals per game, first in points per game, first in tackles per game, first in inside 50s per game, first in goal assists per game, fifth in clearances, first in clangers, which is good. That's a good one. But that's some of them. They're also first in contested possessions per game and second in contested marks per game and first in marks per inside 50, which is probably not a shock. First in 1%ers, first in metres gained per game, first in turnovers, it's just nuts. I go through almost every important statistical category and they're either 1, 2 or 3, top 5 in everything and top 1 in the key ones. When, looking at how we match up against the key stats, similarly, it's no surprise it's a wipeout. More time in forward half, more time in possession, basically, everything. Points from turnover, they concede 35 only, 0.3 from turnover. We're conceding 50. That's a big problem for us in this game. Total points, they're giving up only 65.3 points per game this season. We're giving up almost 196.9. Got to change that, obviously. It helped. It was 100 now with the keeping the Tigers to whatever that was, 65 points or something. That took us under 100. Got to, obviously got to address that at some stage if we're going to win a flag. Points from stoppages, defending points from stoppages. I only averaged 27 points from stoppages. We're averaging nearly 42. The thing's interesting, though, almost the same number of inside 50s, 51 to 51.4, so that's a positive. Points from stoppages is a really interesting one, I thought. So on attack, they're averaging 70 points from turnover. That's going to be critical. We've got to win this game, I think we've got to probably keep them to 50 points around there for points from turnover. We're averaging 53.9 points from turnover. That's a big gap in terms of scores from turnover. The one that I thought was really interesting, and maybe this is an opportunity for us, and this speaks to whether Maxi goes one-on-one and whether Max Heath plays, I think, is points from stoppages. Is they're averaging 39.9 points from stoppages this season. We're not far behind, almost, we're almost level, 38.9 points from stoppages. So That's, if that probably points to a key thing for us in terms of our chances of winning this game is we need to really reduce their scores from turnover, and we really need to, we're about level on points from stoppage. If we could beat them from scores from stoppage in this game, it will go a long way to, hopefully a long way to helping us win this game. Interestingly, our out is Jai Kelly. Their in is their out is Tom McCartan, which is a big out, I think. But they've also got ANZAC Heaney coming in, Laddams coming in, Lewis Melican and Hayden McLean. In terms of the net impact for player points, we're just this is an extended bench. We're bringing in Andy Menzies-Wakefield, Paddy Cross, and Jack Henderson. The net impact of losing Cully and one of them is 0.4 player points. The net impact for Heaney coming in and Laddams, but predominantly Heaney, is plus 12.4 player rating points. That is pretty crazy. So they've got us. Obviously, they're the dominant side in the AFL, playing really good footy. Statistically, by a lot of measures, playing historically good footy. They were in this position 2 years ago. Remember, they won the first 11 games, and everyone said they were unbeatable. There's a really long sort of established history of teams that are unbeaten or won 10 or won the 11 game mark, not going on to win the flag. And I think we've seen that with Brisbane, how well they've timed their run. The last two flags at the last 2 years, in fact, last 3 years, but they won the last two flags. They've started at about the same, 4-3, 3-4, and got it right at the end of the season in terms of their preparation. So that's a caveat for this game, I think. Whether this model, that the way they're playing, is sustainable. Just on some other bits and bobs, average age 27.2 is Sydney. We're 25.2. Average matches, this was remarkable. They're averaging 121 matches per player in the extended lineups. We're at 79.6. So the age isn't too big, but there's a big difference in experience in average matches. So yeah, there's obviously. That's why they're $1.18 and we're $4, whatever it is. So, and they're deserved favourites for this game for sure. So, looking at the game itself, in terms of how we might win this game and what we need to do and how we might play. I've been sort of increasingly thinking later that King is playing a bit of a shell game. Ducks and Drakes, I don't know quite how to what metaphor I'm looking for, but I think everyone is, and me included, has been sucked in a little bit to, what the King game plan looks like and how we're going to play under King. And then, it does my head in a bit. You get these baked in assumptions about game plans, like, that Goody in his final year was a long down the line coach, and he wasn't, and that Melbourne don't play like that anymore under King, and we do, and they sort of metastasize into fact in people's mind, driven often by the sort of shallowness of the analysis in the media. And one of them is, I just don't, the preseason and the intra-club games, and in particular the game against the Saints, it was very evident what we were trying to do, that movement of the ball from the half-back flank, scores from the back half, really, really good ball movement, playing on, moving the ball quickly up the other end. But one of the things is also playing on quickly from a mark or a free kick. We're number one in the AFL for doing so, but it's important to know we were number 2 last year, so it's not like that part of it's radical, but it's definitely, that was something that it looked like, but that's how King's game plan was going to look, and of course those things are important, part of his game plan. But I'm increasingly thinking, in fact, they're not the fundamental part of it. I'm increasingly of the view that the fundamental part of King's game plan is contest, pressure, and territory, and I just find it just ironic, really, because that's, of course, what Goodwin's mantra was: the contest, defense. I'm not saying King with defense. The contest and pressure and territory were absolute central elements to the way Goody had us playing from 21 onwards, or 21 to 24, I should say. And there's a lot of sort of data now. We've got 7 games in. We're a third of the way through the season almost. So we've got a lot of data to be able to evidence what I'm saying about the way we're playing. It feels to me the way King's playing is, in fact, there isn't a single way of playing. We've been really quite different in the games we've played, like the example I gave in this game about the reduction in our metres gained by handball. I think that I think I mentioned this last week. I think King is a lot more tactical, and his game plan is flexible and takes into account mitigating the strengths of the opposition as one of the key elements of the game plan. Whereas Goody, particularly in the last 3 years, that was always the debate. Scott was often, people pointed out how great he is as a game day coach, and some people compared Goody favourably to that model. And Scott is a good in-game coach, Cat Scott, I should say. And Goody's method though was, here's our game plan. We play this way. Everyone else can react to it, and we won't change our game plan. We'll make some adjustments to the opposition. Maybe look at their best player and tag them, or whatever. But essentially, here's how we play. This is our game plan. Let the opposition react to that game plan. I think, and it's probably no coincidence that he did a big stint as an assistant coach of Chris Scott. I think King has got a lot of Chris Scott's sort of combination of, here's our game plan, here's our key philosophies, move the ball quickly, using the link-up handballs, which I'll get to in a second, contest pressure, defence, all of those things. But that he uses also looking at how the opponent will play and looking to mitigate that. I think that's a key part of how he's coaching, and I found it really interesting watching that develop. Just a slightly different way, in some ways, really different way we're played in different games. How far we press up, how much we do that squeeze that I've talked about. Even our structures and setups, ball movement. Whether we use handball to get metres gained that way, high possession, low possession. So really interesting. And so that's why this game for me is such a tactically fascinating game, because the Swans haven't been doing that. The Swans have been doing what Goody said, and I find it really one of the fascinating elements. And every week I seem to repeat a particular word this week. It's fascinating. But one of the really, dare I say it, things I'm looking forward to and about this game, and one of the interesting elements, is Goody being an assistant coach, and he's on the boundary. He's director of coaching, and he's responsible for ball movement and offense. Really interesting. The Swans are playing the same way each week almost, and so they're a bit like Goody was when he was with the D's in 21, 2023. Is this is how we play, and you got to try and beat us, but we're going to back ourselves in to beat us. You can do what you want. We're just going to play our game plan, and that's, obviously they're dominating footy at the moment, so it's working for them. I think we will mitigate our style. We've been compared. So just looking at our game, some of the key things that our game plan, to go back to my point about, what I think are the fundamentals, which are contest, pressure, and territory. And then another fundamental is definitely ball movement, but it's not the only fundamental. We're number one from scores in the AFL from long down the line plays. So that long bombing that everyone criticised Goodwin for, which we weren't doing last year, as I predicted, people would be surprised that we will be a territory team, and at some point or other the media will jerry to this. Well, that happened last week. This is Montagna on First Crack noted these two ones, that we're number one from scores from long down the line players. We're also number one in the AFL for scores for retention for those long bomb down the line plays, and that was really evident against Richmond. We were kicking long to a contest. We win we bring the ball to ground and we win the next contest. That's it in a nutshell. And if you watch how players attack those aerial things, we are often kicking to contests the 3, 4, 5 players. And you look at the way a player like JVR hits those contests. A number of times he was not even going for the mark. He was flat handing it directly down to the front. That's a clear strategy, that long down the line and then win that next contest. We're number 3 for inside 50s, which speaks to the focus on territory. one of the things that I've really liked about going inside 50, number 3 for inside 50s, but we're definitely being more efficient this year, is they seem to have a set play or like a when in a doubt kick to about 20 metres out, 30 metres out directly in front, and players run diagonally from all angles to offer a lead for that, and not always out towards the kicker, sometimes diagonally from behind the kicker or an angle from the kicker. That's been really effective for us in terms of scoring. There's a bunch of examples. The one that jumps in my mind is Latrell slicing into JBR against the Lions, such a beautiful kick. We're number 2 for hitouts, that's no surprise given we're pretty close for scores from stoppages, so hopefully we'll be able to leverage that. Number 3, we're 3rd in the AFL, number 3 in the AFL for centre clearances per game, again, same deal. Number 4 for contested marks per game. That's a great number for us, really impressive. Number 3 for marks inside 50 per game. That's a great number as well. And we're number 5 for total scores per game. We're down near the bottom, not quite, we're sort of mid-table for scores against, but number 5 for scores per game talks to a system that is working. I really love the idea that the King has mentioned a number of times, to play with the big boys. Basically, to win a flag, you've got to be able to score in footy, and scoring we are. So number 5, that's really impressive. Now, a lot of talk about the Swans. I've talked about all of the things, but just some of the ones that I think are really important. They're number 1 for scores from turnover. They're number 1 for scores conceded from turnover. And I'll speak to this a little bit. They're number 1 in the AFL for pressure applied. So they're not just an outside team. Just like us, pressure is critical. What's amazing for them is that they're also, not only they're number 1 for pressure applied, they're number 17 for pressure received, meaning that they apply heaps of pressure to win the contest, but when they get it outside the contest and get that wave running, going, they're getting outside of the contest bubble and they're not getting pressured. And so number 1 for applying pressure, and teams can't put pressure on them because they're getting it outside and running in waves, and teams can't get up in their grill and do something about it. So, I think those things are really key parts of the game that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to apply pressure. We're going to have to find a way to put more pressure on them than other teams have been doing. And we've got to make sure that we don't allow them to cut us up from on turnover. So now, one of the things that's talked about a lot is about them, and probably the most thing that's talked about their game plan is the handball metres gained. So they're number 1 in the AFL for average handball metres gained per game, 660 metres gained by hand per game. That's a auspicious number, I would have thought, this week, given they're playing the Demons. So 666 metres gained by hand per game. Last week they had a bananas 881 metres gained against the Dogs, and they destroyed them. And the Dogs who couldn't stop it, and they were tic-tacking down the ground, and it really threw the Dogs' defensive system completely out of whack. Like Bukas Khamis is setting up aggressively in front of Curnow all the time. That's the way they like to play. But if you don't put pressure on that handball, the player receiving the handball and then kicking in, they're going to tic-tac and go over that defensive line, which is what happened time and time again against the Dogs. A really important thing about handball metres gained is that it's not just measured by the way they measure it isn't the length of each handball. So in a straight line going towards the goal, if a player marks the ball, plays on and runs 20 metres and then handballs 20 metres towards their goal, the handball metres gained for that is 40. Or alternatively, if a player takes a mark, runs 15 metres and then handballs backwards 10 metres, the handball metres gained for that is 5. And if they go lateral, you don't get any, obviously, except for that running forward. Why that's important is often people think handball metres gained is the length of the actual handball. Why that's important in terms of the Swans game plan is because it's that run that's just important as the handball in the chain. So if someone gets a handball receive, runs 20 metres, handballs at 20 metres, that's 40 metres gained. the person who receives that ball runs another 20 metres and then handballs 20 metres. That's another 40. There's 80 metres handball gained in that chain. So for me, why that's important is it speaks as much to that running bit as it does to the actual methodology of handballing forward along, which we're doing as well. And, last week, as I mentioned, the Swans had 881 metres gained against them, and they destroyed the Dogs. But it was as much about that running as it was for the link-up running and the running with the ball in hand that was a factor. Of course, the handball frees that up, and you will have seen the footage, people would have seen the footage. They're exploiting the stand rule. So they have players running past, and they handball as they've already passed almost. The bloke on the mark can't do anything about it. They then receive the ball, then, they run 15 metres and then handball themselves, bang. That's where these numbers, and that's the heart of their game. We're number 6 in the AFL for handball metres gained, and in a way, it's easy to think of handball metres gained and run. Number 6, we average 365.5 metres gained. Why is that relevant? Why is it important? I think it's the importance of it is it's the key to us beating them on the weekend. I think it's absolutely the key. I think we'll employ a similar strategy as we did against the Suns. The Suns are number 2 in the AFL for metres gained, but very much unlike the Swans, they're in the bottom 2 or 3. In fact, they might have been 17th or 18th for pressure and other contest stats. So unlike the Swans is that they're not applying pressure on the opposition, and so they're not defending turnover and they're not stopping other teams moving the ball. They're not slowing down other teams' ball movements. They're not working hard enough. And that points to what we need to do is to win. We need to be putting massive pressure on them. But I think we'll employ a very similar strategy as we did against the Suns. As I said, they're number 2 for metres gained. In that game against the Swans, I said that our season average for metres gained by hand is 365.5. In the game against the Swans, in the game against the Suns, I should say, we only had 87 metres gained by hand. They had 512. Their current season average is 604. So against the Suns, only 87 metres gained. They were 100 almost under their own average for metres gained by hand. And remembering that run, you think of that link-up run. So we obviously against the Suns wanted to avoid that game getting into we wanted to make sure that game didn't get into a ping-pong style running game back and forth. Instead, what we did in that game and what we really did against Richmond, and I wonder whether I think we'll do the same thing against the Suns, is kicking long to a contest, win that contest and score from that contest in simple terms. In that game against the Suns, only 87 metres gained, sort of reinforcing this point about in the way we wanted to play. We had 424 metres gained in that game through our kicking, 14 more than them, I should say. So we had 424 more metres gained than them through our kicking. That's 424 metres gained kicked. We had 14 more inside 50s than them and 52.7% time in forward half. So that just points to that model of, again, the key elements being pressure, intensity, contest, winning the contest, and territory, all of which, ironically, particularly given we're coming up against a team that Goody's the assistant coach for, all of which were hallmarks of Goody's coaching tenure of the Ds. Get it forward, trap it forward, press up, win that. Of course, the critical thing is what the Suns haven't been able to do is to defend turnover because their pressure rating is not high enough, and that's key to us winning. So how do we beat that style of play by the Swans? I think the critical thing is pressure and intensity. Simple. So the key will be frontal pressure. And I said this in the preview of the Suns game is it's almost like you give that first handball. It's that next handball chain that you really smash. So I think we'll squeeze up. We'll play in a very similar way against the Swans. The key is the frontal pressure. By that I mean, and apparently I heard someone say during the week that some of the AFL clubs call this smash the bonnet. And what they mean by that is that frontal pressure of when a player is about to receive a handball is that one of the opponents, in this case, hopefully us against the Swans, peels off their opponent and goes hard to that contest and smashes the bonnet and puts that handball receive under massive pressure, hopefully breaking that scoring chain that possession chain and winning the ball back. If not doing so, forcing the next handball in the chain over the top of that player who's coming up to the contest, who's smashing the bonnet. The ball goes up in the air, it hangs in there a bit longer, and then that gives another player the opportunity, another defensive-minded player coming up to the next contest. It gives them a little bit time. Now, we've been clearly working on that. I was really fascinated to hear read on Demonland in the terrific track watchers thread. Each training has got a really thorough sort of description. Big shout out, by the way, to Kev Martin, ghostwriter, Harvey Wallbanger, anyone else who goes along to training and posts reports on Demonland. It's my go-to, read them absolutely religiously. And I forget who the poster was, but it was a really interesting call. He noted that we seem to be practicing doing exactly what I'm talking about, is getting up to the handball receive and putting pressure on the handball receive. And key to that is knowing when to go. And Richmond kept on, and you can see when teams are a bit of out of whack with this, if you don't commit immediately, if you don't make a decision as soon as you have to, you don't get to that contest. And this is what happened to the Dogs this is what helps explain that 881 metres gained they had against the Dogs, is the Dogs, if I watched that game, and the Dogs were caught all the time not getting up to that contest, to the handball receive contest. They weren't smashing the bonnet and ending up getting caught in no man's land between the player that they peeled off, their own player that they were defending, come up but not quite got to the handball receive contest, and then basically the handball receive player just handballs over the top of that or around that player that's come up to that contest, creating that tic-tac effect. And that's, it was so evident against the Dogs. That's exactly what they did. They just tic-tacked it down the ground, like checkers. And as I said, putting the Dogs' defensive unit under huge pressure because they play a really, they stand in front, play a really aggressive defensive system. I think we'll need to be a lot more back shoulder in this game, because we can't allow them to go over the top. They'll still win plenty of those tic-tacs. We won't, of course, stop all of their chains. So for me, key to winning the game, and I think, as I said, that we'll employ very, very similar strategy to what we did against the Suns. We'll be looking to smash the bonnet all game, get up in their grill. I think we'll also probably try and avoid ourselves getting into a ping-pong game, which will mean we'll have fewer metres gained ourselves, and we'll be looking to kick longer to a contest and win that contest. I think we'll squeeze up, but I don't think that we'll be aggressive defensively. I think we won't press, our defensive line won't press up as hard, perhaps as it did against, for instance, the Saints, or even not so much in the Tigers game. But yeah, I just don't think, or certainly how we did in the last quarter against Tigers. I think that we'll probably hold back a little bit, just because I don't think we can afford to let the ball get out the back of us. The SCG, a lot of talk about the dimensions of the SCG. It's about 11% smaller in area. Now, that may not sound much, but I think it's it is actually a relevant number. The Swans are the only team going through the corridor. I don't have the numbers, but they're really the only team sort of consistently using the corridor as part of their ball movement strategy. They really link up with 3-4 players through the corridor, particularly at the SCG. So, the SCG is not actually as narrow as what, it's often thought of, but still it's 5 metres narrower than the MCG. They are playing through the corridor. I expect that we'll look to clog the corridor up. We did against the Suns, and force the force them to take that on. And then so it'll be interesting to see whether they do. I think they will. And then therefore the critical element of the next piece of the puzzle is whether we can put enough pressure on the kicker. So that's the other thing, or the handballer. Obviously it's not just, I should note it, it's not just pushing up on the receiver. It's also being able to put pressure on the person handballing it as well, and, the receiver. So the key will be putting that pressure on. Our pressure rating needs to be 180 plus for the game, I think, for us to have any chance. We need to obviously take our chances, but we've been really deadly accurate this year, so I'm pretty confident on that front. Defensively, it's really interesting. I actually think that we match up pretty well. AMW, I'm hoping, will come in. We'll take Papley. I think Pets is a perfect matchup for Kerno. Be interesting to see what they do with the wing now, whether Langdon goes back there and Fritter goes forward to cover Jai Cully. But I expect that, as I said before, Cross will come in, go forward. Langdon will stay as part of the back 6, back 7 rotation, and Fritter, who I loved on the wing, just love it. He looks a bit like a sort of Keith Gregg style winger, beautiful left foot, kicked a couple of beauties inside 51 to Sparrow against the Tigers. It'll be really interesting. So key for us to win the game, pressure, win the contest, bring the intensity, win the territory battle. So, win 55% to 45%, take our chances. But most of all, not allow the game to get into a back and forth shootout, because they'll win that if that happens. So we'll probably have low meters gained ourselves. But most of all, really smash the bonnet, get up in the grill of the player receiving the ball, whether that's a kick or a handball, and putting massive pressure on the person handballing or kicking the ball. That will be absolutely critical. And as I said before, that's where, when things are really working well defensively, is that players instinctively know when to go off their player. Any hesitation, they will exploit us and just move the ball too easily against us. Turnover, therefore, will be a really big part of this game. And finally, I think, for us to win, I think Maxi needs to have a stellar game. I love the fact that there's a 9-day break into this game. So hopefully he will be over that. He will have dealt with that nasty back injury he had that he should have not got. Very frustrating, but they physically, Uze, who obviously was a Melbourne coach, midfield coach, knows that the way to beat Maxi is to physically smash him. I hate it. But he got a real physical smashing in that game. But he's had a 9-day break. So a big part of the game will be how well Maxi does against Grundy in some respects. I'm really looking forward to the game. Tactically, I'm really looking forward to the game. I think that we've got a chance of winning the game, that is for sure. And I'm looking forward to watching it here at Chateau Binman on Sunday afternoon. All right, enjoy the game. I will speak to you on the Demonland podcast next Monday, and look forward to next week's Stat File Preview podcast.
That was Binman with the Stats Files. Don't forget to check out our very special podcast chronicling the 1926 Premiership season with Whispering Jack and Ian Munro. It should be the very next podcast on the feed wherever you are listening to this podcast. We also have 2 special feature articles on Demonland commemorating the 1926 season, written by Whispering Jack and Ian Munro. And the Demonland podcast will return live on Monday night at 8 p.m. on Demonland. See you then. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's an emblem for me and for you. Well, it's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Well, every heart beats true for the red and the blue, as we sing a song for you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the red and the blue. Where the team played fine in the year 39, we're the team that no one can lick. And you'll find us there after the final bell with the spirit of 1926. Every every heart beats true for the red and the blue. As we friends sing this song to you, should old acquaintance be forgotten?